I always assumed my parents would use their wealth or guilt to leash me. I never imagined they would weaponize a national security investigation just to force me back into the fold. However, when the Pentagon investigator stared at my classified file and paused for what felt like 10 minutes, the air in the room froze. He picked up the secure line, and I knew my family had started a fire they could not put out. My name is Journey Willis, and for 33 years, I have existed as a glitch in the perfect programming of my family. To the outside world, the Willis dynasty is American royalty, a portrait of industrial success built on the back of Willis Integrated Logistics. We move the world. My father likes to say during his charity galas, raising a glass of scotch that costs more than my first car. But to Richard and Eleonora Willis, I am not a mover of worlds. I am the stagnant cargo, the one crate they cannot manifest, track, or ship to a convenient destination. I am the daughter who walked away from the boardroom to work in a cubicle they cannot brag about, doing a job I cannot describe. I stood in the foyer of my childhood home, a sprawling estate in Northern Virginia that always smelled of lemon polish and old money. I visited exactly 4 times a year. It was a calculated schedule, designed to provide enough presence to avoid being disowned, but enough distance to keep my sanity intact. Tonight was the second quarter mandatory appearance. My mother, Eleonora, descended the grand staircase. She was wearing a silk dress that shimmered like spilled oil. She paused 3 steps from the bottom, waiting for me to acknowledge her entrance. It was a habit she had picked up from watching too many movies about British monarchs. "You look tired." "Journey," she said, bypassing a greeting entirely. It was her way of saying I looked poor. "I am fine, Mother," I said, allowing her to air-kiss my cheek. The air around her smelled of Chanel and judgment. "Your father is in the library. Try not to upset him tonight. He has had a difficult week with the union negotiations in Detroit." I nodded, though we both knew that whether or not my father was upset had very little to do with me, and everything to do with his need to control the emotional barometer of every room he entered. I walked into the dining room, a cavernous space dominated by a mahogany table long enough to land a small aircraft on. My father sat at the head, reading a report on a tablet. He did not look up until I had pulled out my own chair. "Journey," he said, his voice booming. "We were wondering if you were going to make it." "I am 5 minutes early, Dad," I replied, checking my watch. "On time is late in the logistics business," he countered, finally setting the tablet down. Dinner was a theatrical performance of passive aggression. The staff moved silently, placing plates of seared scallops and truffle risotto before us. I ate mechanically. I knew the interrogation was coming. It was just a matter of waiting for the wine to loosen their tongues. It started, as it always did, with money. "So," Eleonora began, cutting a piece of asparagus with surgical precision, "have you reconsidered the condo in Georgetown? Your father and I drove past your current apartment building last week. It looks unsafe." "It is perfectly safe," I said. "It is close to the metro." "It is a shoebox," my father grunted. "And I assume you are still driving that 10-year-old sedan?" "Journey. It is embarrassing. People ask me what my daughter does, and I have to tell them she works for the government. They assume you are a clerk at the DMV. "I am an analyst," I said quietly. "Analyst," he scoffed. "That is a word for people who look at spreadsheets someone else created. You could be vice president of operations here. You could be making $600,000 a year to start. Instead, what do they pay you? 70,000? 80? I took a sip of water. "I am comfortable, Dad." "You are stubborn," my mother interjected, her eyes narrowing. "We simply want you to be secure. We want to know you are taken care of. But you are so secretive. Who are your friends? Who are you dating? We never meet anyone. It is like you live in a void." "I cannot discuss my work. Mother, you know that." "Oh, please." She waved a diamond-clad hand. "You are not James Bond. You process paperwork. The least you could do is be honest with your family about your struggles. If you are in debt, just tell us. If you are in trouble, tell us." "I am not in trouble," I said, keeping my voice level. The conversation circled like this for an hour. They poked and prodded, trying to find a soft spot, a loose thread they could pull to unravel my independence. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to admit that my life was hard, that I was drowning, that I needed their checkbook to breathe. But I gave them nothing. I ate my risotto. I complimented the wine, and I deflected their questions with the bland, non-committal answers I had perfected over a decade. By the time dessert arrived, my mother was visibly vibrating with frustration. She hated nothing more than a variable she could not control. We moved to the sitting room for coffee. The clock on the mantel chimed 9 in the evening. I was calculating how soon I could politely leave when the doorbell rang. It was odd. The Willises did not receive unexpected guests. We had gates. We had security personnel. No one just rang the doorbell. The butler, a man named Henderson who had been with us since I was 6, walked into the sitting room. He looked pale. "Sir," he said, looking at my father, "there is a gentleman here. He says he is from the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency. He showed a badge." My father's eyebrows shot up. "An investigator? At this hour?" "He says it is urgent," Henderson said. "He is asking for Ms. Journey." My stomach dropped, but my face remained stone. I stood up slowly. In my line of work, a surprise visit from DCSA is never good news. It usually means a breach, a compromise, or a reevaluation of clearance based on new, damaging information. "Show him in," my father said, leaning back in his armchair. A small, strange smile played on his lips. The man who walked in was wearing a charcoal suit that fit too well to be off-the-rack government issue, but his shoes were sensible rubber soles. He was in his 40s, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite and left in the rain. He held a leather folio under his arm. "Journey Willis?" he asked. He did not look at my parents. His eyes were locked on me. "I am Journey Willis," I said. "I am Special Investigator Vance," he said. "I need to ask you a series of questions regarding your security clearance. We have received credible information regarding financial instability and undisclosed foreign contacts that may compromise your standing." The room went silent. "Financial instability?" I repeated. "That is incorrect. We have a report stating you have significant gambling debts and have been soliciting loans from non-traditional sources," Vance said. His voice was devoid of emotion. He was reading me, watching for the twitch of an eye, the tremor of a hand. "That is absurd," I said. "My finances are transparent." My mother gasped, a sound so theatrical it belonged on Broadway. "Oh, Journey," she whispered, covering her mouth. "Is this why you would not talk about money? Is this why you are driving that old car?" "Oh, Richard, I knew it." I looked at her. Her eyes were wide, but they were not filled with worry. They were bright. She was enjoying this. "Sir," my father stood up, buttoning his jacket. "I am Richard Willis. This is my house. If my daughter is in legal trouble, we will handle it. We have the best lawyers in the district. There is no need for a government witch hunt." "This is not a legal matter yet, Mr. Willis," Vance said, finally glancing at him. "It is a national security adjudication. If your daughter is compromised, she loses her clearance. If she loses her clearance, she loses her job." My father turned to me, his face arranging itself into a mask of disappointed benevolence. "Journey, look at what has happened. You try to do everything on your own, and you end up in a mess like this. Gambling, foreign contacts, you are naive. You have let people take advantage of you." "I did not do any of this," I said. I looked from my father to my mother. The pieces clicked together with the precision of a well-oiled machine. The dinner conversation, the aggressive questions about my income, the sudden concern about my struggles, and now, an investigator showing up at their house, tonight, while I was conveniently trapped here. This was not a coincidence. This was an ambush. Vance opened his folio. "Ms. Willis, I need to verify some transactions, and I need to ask you about a trip to Mexico City 3 years ago. The allegation suggests you met with representatives of a foreign syndicate." I have never been to Mexico City, I said. My mother shook her head. She went to Cabo for spring break in college. She told Vance helpfully, maybe she went to the city and forgot? She was very wild in her 20s. I was never wild. Mother, I said, my voice dropping an octave, and that was 12 years ago. Vance looked at me. His gaze was intense, weighing my reactions. He was a professional, but he was working off a dossier that had been fed to him, a dossier filled with half-truths and fabricated emergencies. We need to conduct a full financial audit, Vance said, and considering the severity of the accusations, your current access is suspended pending the investigation. Suspended? My father stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. He squeezed hard enough to bruise. Well, that settles it. You cannot go back to work like this. You are done. Journey, it is over. He looked at the investigator. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We will take care of her. She obviously needs help. She will be resigning, effective immediately. We will bring her into the family fold where she can be supervised. I stood very still. The trap had snapped shut. They had filed an anonymous tip, likely using one of their many fixers to make it look legitimate. They had flagged me as a risk. Knowing the bureaucracy would shoot first and ask questions later, they wanted to strip me of my clearance, the one thing that allowed me to work in a world they could not buy. Without it, I was just an unemployed woman in a cheap apartment. They expected me to panic. They expected me to cry, to beg for their lawyers, to accept the job at Willis Integrated Logistics just to salvage my dignity. I looked at Vance, then I looked at my parents. My father's hand was still on my shoulder, heavy and claiming. My mother was pouring herself another glass of wine, her posture relaxed for the first time all evening. They thought they had won. They thought this was a game of chess, and they had just captured the queen. But they had made a miscalculation. They assumed I was a clerk. They assumed my clearance was a standard background check for pushing paper. They did not know what I actually did. They did not know that by triggering this investigation, they hadn't just called the police. They had rung a bell in a room that did not officially exist. I stepped away from my father's grip. I am not resigning, I said clearly. Journey, be realistic, my father snapped. You are finished. Investigator Vance, I said, turning to the man. You have a job to do. I will cooperate fully, but I suggest you look very closely at the source of those allegations, and I suggest we move this interview to a secure location. This environment is compromised. Vance paused. He looked at my parents, then back at me. For a second, the mask of the bureaucrat slipped, and I saw a flicker of curiosity. We can continue this at the field office, Vance said. No, my mother cried out, standing up. She is not going anywhere with you. She stays here. We need to fix this as a family. I grabbed my purse. There is nothing to fix. Mother, you wanted to know what my life is really like? You are about to find out. I walked toward the door. I did not look back, but I could feel their anger radiating like heat from a furnace. They had lit a match to burn down my house, expecting me to come running back to theirs for shelter. They had no idea they had just set fire to a munitions depot. Investigator Vance did not let me leave. Just as my hand touched the brass knob of the front door, he spoke a single word that froze me in place. It was not a command, but a question, delivered with a tone of sudden, sharp confusion that cut through the thick tension of the room. He had flipped to the very back of my file, past the financial records and the standard employment history, to a section that should have been sealed. Wait, he said. I turned back. Vance was staring at a thin, gray annex stapled to the inside back cover of the dossier. It was a technical addendum, something that usually went unnoticed by standard background checkers because it looked like boring IT compliance data. But to a trained eye, specifically one looking for irregularities, it was a flare gun going off in a dark room. My father, Richard, let out a short, derisive laugh. He thinks he found the bankruptcy filing. Journey, you might as well confess now and save the government some time. Vance ignored him completely. He looked up at me, his eyes narrowing. The boredom was gone from his face. replaced by a rigid, high-voltage alertness. He closed the folder abruptly, snapping the thick paper shut with a sound like a pistol crack. "I need to make a call," Vance said. He did not ask for permission. He did not look for a landline. He pulled a secure satellite phone from his jacket pocket, the kind that looks like a brick and costs more than my mother's jewelry. He walked out the front door, stepping onto the porch and closing the heavy oak door behind him. My mother, Eleonora, sighed and sat back down on the velvet sofa, smoothing her skirt. She looked like a cat that had just pushed a vase off a table and was waiting to be fed. "That is it. Then," she said, picking up her wineglass, "he is calling his superiors to authorize the revocation. I hope you are happy. Journey. We tried to do this quietly. We tried to keep it within the family. But you had to push." I stood by the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. My parents thought Vance was calling to fire me. I knew he was calling to ask why a standard background check had just flagged a file that required a top-secret sensitive compartmented information clearance to even read. My cover was not just blown, it was being incinerated. "He is not calling to fire me," I said quietly. My father poured himself a scotch. "Don't be delusional. He saw the debts. He saw the foreign contacts. The game is up. You will surrender your badge, or whatever it is you have, and tomorrow morning you will report to the logistics center. I have already had HR draft an entry-level contract. You will start in dispatch. It will teach you humility." I looked at him, really looked at him. He was a man who moved cargo ships and negotiated with unions. He understood power as a physical force, something you bought and sold. He had absolutely no concept of the invisible world I lived in. He thought he had pulled a string to punish his daughter. He did not realize he had just yanked the tail of a sleeping tiger. 10 minutes passed. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the clinking of ice in my father's glass. Then the front door opened. Vance walked back in, but he was not alone. 2 men followed him. They were not wearing the generic charcoal suits of mid-level bureaucrats. They were wearing tactical gear disguised as business casual. Heavy boots, loose jackets that concealed sidearms, and earpieces coiling down their necks. I recognized the stance immediately. These were not investigators. They were containment specialists. My father stood up, his face flushing red. "Who are these men? I did not invite them into my home. This is private property." Vance did not look at my father. He looked at me. His demeanor had shifted entirely. He was no longer the aggressor. He was a man who realized he was standing in the middle of a minefield. "Ms. Willis," Vance said, his voice flat and formal, "we need to secure the environment." "Secure the environment?" My mother laughed, a high, brittle sound. "What on earth are you talking about? We are having coffee." "Sir," "Ma'am." One of the new agents stepped forward. He was a giant of a man with a shaved head. "You need to vacate this room immediately." "Excuse me?" My father stepped forward, his chest puffing out. "Do you know who I am? I am Richard Willis. I am a donor to the governor's campaign. You do not order me out of my own library. Get out of my house before I call the police commissioner." "Mr. Willis," Vance cut in, his voice cutting like a whip. "Under Title 18 of the United States Code, interference with a federal investigation involving national security assets is a felony punishable by up to 20 years in federal prison. We are currently operating under a Code Red containment protocol. If you do not leave this room in the next 30 seconds, you will be detained." The air left the room. My father stopped mid-stride. He looked at Vance, then at the 2 agents who were resting their hands near their waistbands. He looked for the bluff, the lie, the negotiation tactic. He found none. "National security?" my mother whispered. "For a gambling debt?" "Out," the bald agent said. "Now." My father looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and sudden, dawning fear. "Journey? What is going on?" "Go, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "Just go." They were ushered out of the room like unruly children. The heavy double doors of the library were closed and locked from the inside. One agent stood by the door, his back to us. The other moved to the window, scanning the perimeter of the estate. Vance walked over to the mahogany desk where my father had sat only moments before. He placed my file on the leather surface. He looked at me, and for the first time, there was respect in his eyes, and fear. "Ms. Willis," he said. He did not ask me to sit. "Agent Vance," I replied. I made a call to the Central Adjudications Facility. He said, "I read them the code on the bottom left of your technical annex. Do you know what they told me?" I stayed silent. "They told me that code does not exist in the general database," Vance continued. "They transferred me 3 times. Finally, I spoke to a commander at the Pentagon who told me to secure the subject and secure the room. He asked me how I got access to this file." I remained still, my hands clasped loosely in front of me. Vance leaned forward. "The file alleges you have $50,000 in gambling debts to a syndicate in Macau. That is the cover story for Operation Silent Ledger." I said. My voice was calm, mechanical. "It is a backstopped legend used to explain large cash withdrawals required for purchasing intelligence assets in the Pacific Rim." Vance blinked. "And the trip to Mexico City? The meeting with the cartel representatives?" "Extraction of a compromised asset," I said. "Date, November 4th, 2 years ago. Mission ID, Sierra Tango 4. Vance took a deep breath. He looked down at the file, then back at me. He was sweating slightly. "Your parents," he said slowly. "They submitted this tip. They provided documentation, bank statements, travel records. They hired a private investigator to dig up dirt." I said. "They found the breadcrumbs my agency left to make me look like a flawed, low-level analyst. They found the cover story. And because they are arrogant, they assumed it was real. They submitted it to you to get my clearance revoked so I would be forced to work for them." Vance ran a hand over his face. "Jesus, do they have any idea what they have done?" "No," I said. "They think they are teaching me a lesson about financial responsibility." Vance looked at the closed doors. He realized the magnitude of the disaster. By submitting a formal tip based on classified cover legends, my parents had not just caused a family spat, they had alerted the federal government that unauthorized civilians, the private investigator, my parents, their lawyers, were in possession of data that tracked back to active intelligence operations. "This is not a background check anymore," Vance said, closing the folder. "This is a leak." He looked at the agent by the door. "Call the director. Tell him we have a code black situation. The Willis family has unknowingly compromised a level 5 asset. We need a sweep team here within the hour." I walked over to the window and looked out at the manicured lawn. I could see my parents standing on the patio. My father was on his phone, furiously gesturing. My mother was pacing. They looked small from here. They looked like 2 people who had thrown a stone at a glass house, only to realize the glass was actually the containment wall of a nuclear reactor. Vance moved beside me. "We have to interview them," he said. "We have to find out exactly who they got this information from. If that private investigator has copies of your travel logs, then he is a dead man walking." I finished. "Or he's about to spend the rest of his life in a dark room." Vance looked at me. "I am sorry. Ms. Willis, I did not know." "You did your job." "Vance," I said, "now comes the hard part." "What is that?" "Explaining to 2 people who have bought their way out of everything that they cannot write a check to fix treason." The agent by the door spoke into his wrist microphone. "Team inbound. 6 minutes." The library, once a sanctuary of my father's ego, now felt like a bunker. The smell of old paper and leather was replaced by the metallic scent of adrenaline. My parents had wanted to know who I really was. They had wanted to strip away the secrets. They were about to get their wish, and it was going to destroy them. The silence in the library was heavy, pressing against the mahogany shelves like a physical weight. Investigator Vance sat across from me. His posture completely changed. 10 minutes ago, he had been a hunter looking for a wounded gazelle. Now, he looked like a bomb disposal technician realizing the device he was working on had been wired by a lunatic. "Why, Ms. Willis?" Vance asked. He had opened a fresh page in his notebook. His voice was low, respectful, but demanding. Why would your own flesh and blood file a report that accuses you of treason? Do they understand that if those allegations were real, you would be looking at 20 years in a federal supermax? I looked at the closed doors. I could hear the faint murmur of my father's voice outside, shouting at someone on his cell phone. Likely his lawyer, likely the governor. It did not matter anymore. They do not understand. I said, to Richard and Eleonora Willis, the government is just another vendor. They think the Pentagon is like a high-end catering company. If you do not like the service, you speak to the manager. If the employee is being difficult, you have them fired. They do not comprehend that there are systems in this country that do not care about their stock portfolio. Vance tapped his pen on the paper, but the specific nature of the allegations, the gambling, the foreign contacts, this was designed to kill your clearance. It was designed to kill my independence, I corrected him. I stood up and walked to the fireplace. Above the mantel hung a portrait of the family from 10 years ago. I was in the back, smiling a smile that did not reach my eyes. My sister, Lena, was in the front, looking perfect and pliable. You have to understand the logic of Willis Integrated Logistics. I told Vance, to them, my job is an insult. I am 33 years old. I have a degree from Georgetown and a master's from Hopkins. In their eyes, I am wasting a prime asset on a government salary that barely covers rent in this city. They look at me, and they see a sports car being used to haul manure. Vance frowned. But you are a high-level asset. Your work. My work does not exist to them. I cut in, because I cannot talk about it. They assume it is trivial, because I cannot bring home a bonus check of $500,000. They assume I am failing, but that is not the real sin. The real sin is that I am succeeding without their permission. I turned to face him. Vance was writing, but he was watching me closely. Last Christmas, I continued, my father offered me the vice president position for the European division. He put a contract on the table. It included a starting salary of $400,000, stock options, and a corporate apartment in London. He told me all I had to do was quit my government job. He called it a hobby. You refused, Vance stated. It was not a question. I burned the contract in this fireplace, I said. Vance let out a short breath. So this investigation. It is an intervention, I said, the bitterness coating my tongue like ash. That is what they call it. They think I am addicted to mediocrity. They think I am lost. So they decided to break the one thing that keeps me away from them, my clearance. They knew that if I lost my clearance, I would lose my job. And if I lost my job, with a black mark on my record, no one else in D.C. would hire me. I would be unemployable in the sector. And then? Vance prompted. And then I would have to come home. I said, I would have to take the job in the logistics division. I would have to let my father pay my bills. I would have to be the daughter they paid for. They did not want to send me to prison. Agent Vance, they wanted to send me to my room. Vance looked down at his notes. He looked sick. I could see the realization washing over him. The sheer, petty scale of it. He dealt with spies, with terrorists, with people selling secrets for ideology or desperation. He was not used to dealing with people who weaponized the Department of Defense because they were having a temper tantrum about their daughter's career choices. This is administrative abuse of the highest order, Vance said quietly. They knowingly submitted false information to a federal agency to manipulate a personnel decision. They submitted true information that was taken out of context. I clarified. That is why it is so dangerous. They hired a private investigator who found the shell accounts I use for operations. They saw transfers of $50,000 going to a bank in Macau. To a civilian. That looks like gambling. To them, it was the smoking gun. They did not care to ask if there was another explanation. They just wanted the ammunition. I walked back to the chair and sat down. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a cold, hard rage that was finally crystallizing in my chest. For years, I had treated my family like a hazard to be managed. I kept my distance. I gray-rocked their insults. I played the role of the disappointing daughter because it was safer than being the target of their ambition. But I had underestimated them. I thought they were just arrogant. I did not realize they were predatory. "My mother," I said, looking Vance in the eye. "She told me tonight that she knew I was struggling. She looked happy about it. She believes that social capital is the only law of physics that matters. She thinks that even if this goes wrong, she can make a few calls to a senator, maybe donate to a police fund, and it will all go away. She thinks she can start a fire in a government building and then just pay for the sprinklers." Vance closed his notebook. He looked at the technical annex of my file again, the one that had started this whole unraveling. "She is wrong," Vance said. "This is not a traffic ticket. This is a Title 50 violation. By exposing your cover legend to a third party, the private investigator, and then entering it into an unclassified complaint system, they have triggered a containment protocol." He leaned forward. "Ms. Willis, I need to ask you a specific question for the record. Do you believe your parents are acting as agents of a foreign power?" "No," I said immediately. "Do you believe they are being blackmailed?" "No." "Then we are left with the third option," Vance said. "Malicious intent." I nodded slowly. It was a heavy word. Malicious. It implied a desire to harm. It stripped away the excuse of ignorance. "They love me," I said, the words tasting strange. In their twisted, narcissistic way. "They love me. But they love ownership more. They fear my success because they cannot take credit for it. If I become a director at the agency, if I save lives, if I change policy, they cannot put that in their annual newsletter. They cannot brag about it at the club. So they would rather destroy it. They would rather have a broken daughter they can control than a powerful one they cannot understand." Vance stood up. He walked to the window where the other agent was still scanning the perimeter. The sun had set completely now. The grounds of the estate were bathed in the artificial glow of security lights. "We have to formalize this," Vance said without turning around. "I have to change the designation of this case. It is no longer a background investigation. It is now a sensitive insider threat event. The subject of the investigation is no longer you, Ms. Willis. It is the sources of the adverse information." "My parents," I said. "Yes." Vance turned back to me. "And because of the classification level of the compromised data, we cannot just walk away. We have to scrub this. We have to find out what that private investigator knows. We have to seize devices. We have to interview your parents under caution." He paused. "This is going to destroy their reputation. Journey. Once the Bureau gets involved, once the subpoenas start, the Willis name will be toxic." I sat there, thinking about the dinner, the way my father had sneered at my sedan, the way my mother had smiled when she thought I was in debt. They had invited me here to break me. They had served me scallops and betrayal on fine china. "I did not do this," I said softly. "No," Vance agreed. "You did not. But I am not going to stop it." I finished. Vance nodded. He checked his watch. "The sweep team is 2 minutes out. When they get here, I need you to confirm the list of all individuals who might have had access to your parents' personal files. We need to close the loop before that private eye sells your travel logs to a tabloid, or worse, to a foreign intelligence service." I looked at the portrait on the mantel one last time. The girl in the picture looked so hopeful. She thought that if she just worked hard enough, if she just became important enough, her parents would finally respect her. She was an idiot. I opened my purse and took out my government ID. I placed it on the table next to Vance's folder. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a declaration of war. "I am ready. Agent Vance," I said, "let them in." The sound of helicopters began to thump in the distance, a rhythmic beating that vibrated against the glass of the library windows. My parents thought they had called the principal to scold a truant child. They were about to find out that when you dial the number for national security, the people who answer do not care how much money you have in the bank. They only care about the threat. And tonight, for the first time in their privileged, untouchable lives, the threat was them. The next 72 hours did not happen in my parents' library. They happened in a windowless, secure facility in Arlington, a place that smelled of ozone and stale coffee, where time was measured not by the sun, but by the shift changes of analysts. I was not technically under arrest, but I was certainly not free. My badge was in a plastic bag. My phone was in a Faraday cage. I was a ghost in the machine I had spent my career helping to build. Investigator Vance had assembled a small, specialized team. They were not looking for spies anymore. They were looking for the origin point of a lie. We started with the anatomy of the accusation. It was not a single letter. It was a coordinated barrage. Vance projected the timeline onto the smartboard at the front of the room. At 8 o'clock in the morning on Monday, a complaint was filed through the Department of Defense Inspector General hotline. At 9:30, a similar packet was physically mailed to the FBI field office in Washington. At noon, an anonymous email was sent to the corporate compliance officer at my own agency. 3 strikes, Vance said, pointing at the timestamps. This was not a concerned citizen spotting a red flag. This was a carpet bombing campaign. They wanted to make sure that no matter where you turned, you were already flagged. I looked at the text of the complaints. They had been scrubbed of names, but the syntax was hauntingly familiar. The writer used phrases like moral turpitude and filial disrespect, mixed in with the buzzwords of counterintelligence. It was a jarring hybrid of a Victorian scolding and a federal indictment. Look at the vocabulary, I said, pointing to the second paragraph of the FBI letter. Who uses the word unbecoming to describe a financial transaction? That is not tradecraft. That is my mother. Vance nodded to a younger analyst named Cohen. Run the linguistic analysis against the public social media profiles of Eleanora Willis. Cohen typed furiously. It took less than 10 minutes. 99% probability match on sentence structure and idiom usage. Cohen reported, specifically, the use of the double negative to imply guilt. It is her signature. So we knew who wrote them, but we needed to know how they got the ammunition. The accusations were specific. They cited dates, amounts, and locations. They knew I was in Mexico City. They knew about the $50,000. We spent the next 12 hours tearing apart the financial evidence. The tipster had provided bank statements that looked damning. There was a transfer of $50,000 to a holding company in Macau, labeled in the complaint as gambling debt settlement. Vance pulled up the raw SWIFT data from the banking network, bypassing the PDF the tipster had provided. Here is the twist, Vance said, highlighting a line of code. The original transfer was not labeled gambling debt. The metadata on the transaction is tagged tuition reimbursement, language immersion. I nodded. I was learning Mandarin. The agency paid for it through a front company to keep it off official books. Someone altered the memo line on the statement before sending it to us. Vance said, he looked at me. Your parents did not just find dirt. They manufactured it. They took a legitimate, if covert, transaction and photoshopped the description to fit their narrative of you being a degenerate gambler. That is fraud, I said. That is federal wire fraud and evidence tampering. It gets worse, Cohen interrupted. He pulled up a new slide. This is regarding the suspicious foreign contact. The screen showed a grainy photo of me at a coffee shop in Georgetown. I was sitting across from an older man with a beard. We were laughing. The caption provided by the tipster read, Subject meeting with known radical handler. Possible exchange of sensitive data. I stared at the photo. That is Dr. Aris. I said, he is the chair of the Middle Eastern Studies Department at Georgetown. He was my thesis advisor. We were having coffee because I was asking him to recommend a book for my niece. Vance zoomed in on the photo. Look at the angle, he said. This was taken from inside a car parked across the street. Telephoto lens, professional surveillance. He tapped the screen. Your parents hired a private investigator. That is standard for rich families checking up on wayward children. But this PI did not just watch you. He was instructed to build a case. He was not gathering facts. He was gathering props for a play your parents had already written. We traced the payment for the PI within 6 hours. It was billed to Willis Integrated Logistics, Corporate Security. My father had expensed the surveillance of his own daughter as a business cost, labeling it competitor research. But the real shock, the one that made the air in the room turn frigid, came at the 48-hour mark. Cohen had been scrubbing the deep web, looking for any other leaks related to my profile. He found a video hosted on a private server used by high-end event planners in DRC. It was raw footage from a charity gala 3 months ago. My mother was holding a glass of champagne, surrounded by 3 other women, wives of senators and lobbyists. "Turn the volume up," Vance ordered. On the screen, my mother leaned in, her face flushed with the thrill of gossip. "Oh, Journey cannot be here," she said, lowering her voice but speaking clearly into the ambient microphone of the videographer passing by. "She is in Europe again. She says it is paperwork, but we know better. Richard says she is working on the new drone protocols. Very hush-hush. She practically runs the CIA from her laptop, but we are not supposed to talk about it." The room went dead silent. I felt the blood drain from my face. I have never worked on drone protocols. I have never worked for the CIA. I am a crypto analyst for the NSA. "She is lying," I whispered. "She is making it up to sound important. She is inventing a James Bond life for me because analyst is too boring for her cocktail parties." "It does not matter if it is a lie," Vance said, his voice hard. "She is publicly associating your name with specific, sensitive defense capabilities in a room full of people who are targets for foreign intelligence collection." He rewound the video. "Look at the waiter," he said. We watched the waiter standing behind my mother. He paused when she said, "Drone protocols." He turned his head slightly. "Facial recognition identifies him as a suspected operative for a foreign service we are currently monitoring," Vance said. He was working the party to pick up exactly this kind of loose talk. I closed my eyes. My mother wanted to destroy my career to bring me home, but in her vanity, she had done something far worse. She had painted a target on my back. She had told the world, and the spies listening, that I was a high-value asset with access to drone tech. She had made me a priority target for kidnapping or recruitment, all to impress her friends. And then, to cap it off, she reported me to the Pentagon as a security risk, triggering an investigation that would expose all of this. "They did not just light a match," I said, my voice shaking. "They poured gasoline on me and handed out lighters to everyone in the room." Vance stood up. He looked tired, but his resolve was iron. "This is no longer just about the false report," he said. "Your family has created a counterintelligence nightmare. They have compromised your identity through negligence and broadcasted fabrication. They have financed a private surveillance operation against a federal asset, and they tampered with financial documents to mislead a federal investigation." He picked up the phone on the wall. "Get the tactical team ready," he said to the voice on the other end. "We are bringing them in." "Not for a chat?" I asked. "No," Vance said, strapping on his shoulder holster. "For an interrogation. We are going to treat them exactly like what they are, unregistered foreign agents of chaos." He looked at me. "You do not have to be there. Journey, you can stay here." I thought about the library. I thought about the way my father looked at his watch while he destroyed my life. I thought about my mother's smile as she lied about my debts. "I want to be there," I said. "I want to see their faces when they realize that the system they thought they could use as a weapon is actually a shield, and I am the one holding it." Vance nodded. "Let's go." We left the secure facility as the sun was setting on the 3rd day. The 72 hours of silence were over. We were heading back to the Willis estate, but this time, we were not knocking on the front door. We were taking the whole house down, brick by brick. The investigation had turned the corner. It was no longer a question of if my parents were guilty. It was a question of how much collateral damage they had caused before we could stop them, and I was done being the collateral. The return to the Willis estate did not look like a homecoming. It looked like a seizure. We did not use sirens, and the tactical team did not kick down the door. But the convoy of black SUVs that rolled up the driveway at 7 o'clock in the evening carried a weight that crushed the gravel beneath their tires. My parents were waiting in the formal living room. They had been instructed to remain there by the initial containment team. When I walked in, flanked by Vance and two legal counsel officers from the Department of Justice. The atmosphere in the room shifted from annoyance to genuine confusion. My father, Richard, was wearing a smoking jacket, holding a glass of scotch that had gone warm in his hand. My mother, Eleonora, was pacing near the grand piano, her heels clicking a nervous staccato on the hardwood. Finally, Richard said, stepping forward, "I assume this theatrics is over? We have a dinner reservation at Le Diplomate in an hour." "Sit down, Miss Willis," Vance said. He did not shout. He did not raise his voice. He spoke with the absolute, bored authority of a man who could order an airstrike as easily as he ordered lunch. Richard blinked. "Excuse me?" "Sit down," Vance repeated, "or you will be restrained." My father sat. He looked at me, searching for an ally, but I stood against the far wall, my arms crossed. I was not part of the family unit tonight. I was part of the prosecution. Vance placed a single thick document on the coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. "This is a formal notification of a Section 800 espionage and fraud inquiry." Vance announced, "As of this moment, your assets are frozen pending a federal audit. Your passports have been flagged. You are currently designated as persons of interest in a counterintelligence investigation." My mother laughed, a high, sharp sound that cracked in the middle. "Espionage? Don't be ridiculous. We filed a report about our daughter's gambling problem. If anyone is in trouble, it is her." Vance signaled to one of the legal officers, a woman with glasses and a face made of flint. She stepped forward and began to read from a tablet. Under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1001, it is a federal crime to knowingly and willfully make any materially false, fictitious, or fraudulent statement or representation in any matter within the jurisdiction of the executive branch of the government of the United States. She looked up. "We have forensic evidence that you, Eleonora Willis, instructed a private investigator to alter the metadata of bank statement 402 to change language tuition to gambling debt. We have the email chain where you explicitly told him to, quote, make it look dirty," end quote. My mother went pale. That was hyperbole. I was stressed. "That was a felony," the officer corrected. "And because you submitted that falsified document to the Department of Defense to trigger a security review of a cleared asset, you have also violated the Espionage Act by attempting to sabotage national defense capabilities through the neutralization of key personnel." Richard slammed his hand on the table. "Neutralization? She is my daughter. We were trying to help her. We wanted her to come home and work for the family business." "And that brings us to the business," Vance said. He pulled another file from his briefcase. "Willis Integrated Logistics." He read, "You hold 3 active contracts with the Naval Supply Systems Command. You move parts for the Atlantic Fleet." My father puffed up his chest. "We are patriots. We serve this country." "You used corporate funds to pay for the surveillance of a federal intelligence officer," Vance said. He held up the invoice from the private investigator, account number 772, labeled as competitor research, by utilizing defense contractor revenue to finance a harassment campaign against the NSA. You have triggered a mandatory suspension of all your government contracts. The silence that followed was absolute. I watched my father's face crumble. He did not care about the law, or my feelings, or the truth. But he cared about the contracts. The Navy contracts were 30% of his revenue. They were the foundation of his empire. "You cannot do that," Richard whispered. "That will bankrupt the division." "It is already done," Vance said. "The suspension order was signed 20 minutes ago." My mother stood up, her eyes blazing with panic and fury. She reached for her phone on the piano. "I am calling Senator Graham," she announced, her voice trembling. "I went to college with his wife. I chaired his fundraising committee last year. I am going to tell him that the Pentagon is harassing a donor. You will all be fired by morning." Vance did not stop her. He simply nodded to the legal officer. "Record that," Vance said calmly. "Record what?" My mother froze, her thumb hovering over the screen. "Record that Eleonora Willis is attempting to utilize a sitting United States Senator to interfere with an active counterintelligence investigation. Vance said. He turned to my mother. Go ahead, Mrs. Willis. Make the call. But you should know that as soon as you connect, we are legally required to open a file on the senator. We will have to investigate his relationship with you. We will have to subpoena his communications to see if he was aware of your leak regarding the drone protocols. You will not be saving yourself. You will be dragging him into a federal inquiry. I am sure he will be very grateful for that. My mother's hand shook. She looked at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. She knew how Washington worked. She knew that the moment she became radioactive, her friends would cut her loose to save themselves. If she called the senator, she wouldn't find a savior. She would find a dial tone, or worse, a public disavowal. She slowly lowered the phone. What do you want? She whispered. Vance pushed a document across the table. It was not a plea deal, it was a capitulation. This is a security control agreement, Vance said. It states that you acknowledge your actions created a security vulnerability. It mandates that you will cease all contact with Journey Willis unless approved by a designated security officer. It grants the Department of Defense full access to your corporate servers to scrub any data related to your daughter. And it requires you to resign from the board of Willis Integrated Logistics pending the conclusion of the audit. Resign? My father choked out. I built that company. Then you should not have used it to attack the United States government. Vance said simply, sign it, or we take you into custody right now for evidence tampering and fraud. My father looked at the paper. He looked at the agent standing by the door. Then, slowly, he turned his head to look at me. Journey, he said. His voice was no longer booming. It was small, cracked, old. Journey, please, tell them this is a misunderstanding. We are your parents. You cannot let them take the company. You cannot let them treat us like criminals. I looked at him. I saw the man who had belittled my career for a decade. I saw the man who had tried to break me just so he could own the pieces. And I saw the man who was now realizing that his money had no currency in the room he had forced himself into. I stepped forward, moving out of the shadows. I cannot help you. Richard, I said. I used his first name. It felt like cutting a cord. I am your father, he pleaded. No, I said. Tonight, you are not my father. You are the subject of an investigation, and I am the asset you compromised. But we did it for you, my mother cried out, tears finally streaming down her face. We just wanted you back. You wanted a puppet, I said. You wanted me to fail so you could feel successful. You were willing to destroy my life, my reputation, and my service to this country just to win an argument about a condo in Georgetown. I looked at Vance. I have no operational control over this situation. I told my parents, keeping my voice devoid of emotion. The train left the station when you forged that bank statement. You rang the bell. Now you have to answer the door. Richard looked down at the pen Vance had placed on the table. His hand trembled as he picked it up. He was a man who had signed billion-dollar mergers and union treaties, but now he looked like he was signing his own death certificate. He signed. Then he pushed the paper to my mother. She sobbed, a messy, undignified sound that echoed in the high ceilings of the room, and signed her name next to his. Vance took the paper back and checked the signatures. One more thing, Vance said, sliding the document into his briefcase. The narrative ends here. If you speak to the press, if you post on social media, if you complain to your friends at the club that you are victims of a conspiracy, we will execute the arrest warrants we have in the car. You will say that you are stepping down for health reasons. You will say that Journey is doing vital work for the country and you are proud of her privacy. And then you will never speak of this again. Do we understand each other? My parents nodded. They were broken, not by poverty, but by the sudden, violent removal of their delusion. They had spent their lives thinking they were the chess players. They had just realized they were not even pawns. They were just the dust on the board. I turned to the door. Where are you going? My mother asked, her voice a whisper. Home, I said, my real home. I walked out of the house. I did not say goodbye. There was no need. The people I had left behind in that living room were strangers to me now. They were just two people who had tried to buy the sun and were surprised when they got burned. As I stepped into the cool night air, Vance walked beside me. "You handled that well," he said. I looked back at the house, glowing softly in the night. It looked beautiful. It looked like a prison. "I did not handle anything, Vance," I said. "I just let them be exactly who they are. The rest took care of itself." We got into the SUV. The engine purred to life. As we drove away, I didn't look back at the rearview mirror. I was looking forward, to a road that was finally, completely mine. The investigation was far from over, but the verdict was already in. My family had put me on trial, and they were the ones who had lost everything. The silence that followed the raid on my parents' estate was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a dam about to burst. For 3 days, I stayed in my apartment, monitoring the situation through the encrypted updates Vance sent to my secure terminal. The Department of Defense had placed a hard lock on Willis Integrated Logistics. Every container, every invoice, and every digital handshake was being frozen for review. To the outside world, it looked like a standard compliance audit, but inside the family, it was being framed as an assassination. My phone rang on Tuesday afternoon. It was not my parents. They were legally barred from contacting me under the security control agreement they had signed. It was my sister, Lena. "Journey," she said. Her voice was thin, lacking its usual polished cadence. "Can we meet?" "I am busy." "Lena," I said, typing a command into my laptop. "Please," she interrupted. "I am not asking for Mom and Dad. I am asking for me. I am scared. Journey. There are men in suits going through my office. They are seizing hard drives. I do not know what is happening." I hesitated. Lena had always been the golden child, the one who stayed, the one who married the right man and took the vice president title my father created for her. She was compliant where I was rebellious. She was safe, or so she thought. "Starbucks on K Street," I said. 30 minutes. When I arrived, Lena was already there, sitting in the back corner. She looked like a ghost of the socialite she usually was. Her designer blazer was wrinkled, and her eyes were rimmed with red. She was clutching a coffee cup with both hands, as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the earth. I sat down across from her. I did not buy a drink. "They are blaming you," Lena said without preamble. "Mom says you orchestrated this whole thing to destroy the family legacy. Dad says you are vindictive. He says you turned the government against us because you were jealous of the business." I leaned back. "Do you believe that?" "I do not know what to believe," Lena whispered. She looked around the busy shop. "Paranoid. All I know is that half our fleet is grounded. The Navy contracts are suspended, and yesterday, the bank called to say our credit lines are under review. Journey. We are losing $500,000 a day. That is the price of treason." "Lena," I said coldly, "they falsified documents to strip a federal officer of her clearance. Did they think the Pentagon would just send a warning letter?" Lena looked down. "It is not just the documents. Journey." The way she said it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was the tone of someone who was holding a live grenade and had forgotten how to throw it. "What do you mean?" I asked, lowering my voice. Lena reached into her purse and pulled out a small silver flash drive. She placed it on the table between us, covering it with her hand. "Dad asked me to give this to you," she said. I looked at the drive. "What is it?" "He thinks—" Lena swallowed hard. "He thinks that since you are inside now, since you won against the investigator, that maybe you can fix the other problem." I stared at her. My father was delusional. He thought that because I had survived his attack, I was now the alpha dog who could be commanded to protect the pack. "What other problem?" I asked. "There is a shipment," Lena said. "Container number 894. It is sitting in the port of Baltimore right now. It has been flagged by customs for a secondary inspection." "And?" "And it contains dual-use avionics components bound for a client in a sanctioned region," Lena whispered. The world stopped. The noise of the coffee machine, The chatter of the customers, the traffic outside, it all faded into a dull roar. Dual-use avionics. That meant technology that could be used for civilian planes or guided missiles. Exporting that to a sanctioned entity was not just a crime. It was an act of international proliferation. It was federal prison time. Decades of it. "You are smuggling tech," I said. My voice was barely audible. "We call it creative logistics," Lena said, reciting a corporate euphemism that sounded like ashes in her mouth. "The client pays triple the market rate. Dad said it was the only way to keep the margins up after the union strikes last year. He said it was just wires and chips." I looked at the flash drive. It was not a peace offering. It was a request for complicity. He wants me to use my clearance to get the container released. I realized he thinks that because I work in intelligence, I can make a phone call and tell customs to back off. He thinks I can wave a badge and clear a shipment of illegal weapons technology. Lena nodded miserably. "He said that if you do this, if you save this shipment, he will forgive you. He will let you come back to the family. He will even give you a seat on the board." I laughed. It was a dark, humorless sound. He will forgive me? For what? For him trying to destroy my career? And his price for this forgiveness is that I become an accessory to international arms trafficking? Lena pushed the drive toward me. "Journey, please, if that container is opened, the company is dead. Dad will go to jail. I might go to jail. I signed some of the manifests. I did not know what was in them. I swear. But my signature is there." I looked at my sister. She was 31 years old, but in that moment, she looked like a child who had broken a vase and was begging her big sister to hide the pieces. She had spent her whole life doing exactly what our parents wanted. She had married the right man, worn the right clothes, and signed the papers they put in front of her. And now, that obedience was about to destroy her. I realized then that the initial investigation into my clearance was never just about control. It was about desperation. My parents knew their house of cards was wobbling. They knew they were engaging in illegal activity. They needed me back not just to stroke their egos, but because they needed a shield. They wanted to own a federal intelligence officer so that when the day came, like today, they could force me to cover their tracks. They were not just bad parents, they were parasites. I reached out and put my hand over the flash drive. "I am taking this," I said. Lena exhaled, a sound of immense relief. "Thank you. Oh, thank you. Journey, I knew you would help. I knew you would not let us drown." I did not smile. "I am not taking this to fix it. Lena, I am taking this as evidence." Lena froze. Her face went slack. "What?" "You just confessed to a felony," I said, "and you handed me the proof." "No," Lena gasped. "Journey, no, you cannot. This is Dad. This is the family." "This is illegal," I snapped, my voice sharp enough to cut. "Do you understand what you're doing? You are trafficking restricted technology. You are not a victim here. Lena, you are a co-conspirator." I did not know," she stammered. "Ignorance is not a defense when your name is on the manifest," I said. I picked up the flash drive and slipped it into my pocket. "Journey, give it back," Lena pleaded, reaching across the table. Her desperation was rising, panic edging into her voice. "If you turn that in, it is over." It was over the minute Dad decided to sell out his country for a profit margin. I stood up. Lena looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. She looked betrayed. She looked at me like I was the monster. "Why do you hate us?" she sobbed. "Why can't you just be on our side for once?" "Because your side is the wrong side. Lena," I said, "and I do not hate you. If I hated you, I would let you walk out of here thinking everything is going to be fine until the FBI kicks down your door at 4 a.m. I leaned down close to her. "Get a lawyer. Lena, not Dad's lawyer. A real criminal defense attorney. Do it today, and tell him everything. That is the only way you survive this." I walked out of the coffee shop. My heart was pounding in my chest like a sledgehammer. I had the flash drive in my pocket. It felt heavy. like a piece of lead. My parents had sent Lena to corrupt me. They had used my sister as a mule to carry their guilt, hoping I would pick it up. They had underestimated me one last time. They thought my loyalty to the name Willis was stronger than my oath to the Constitution. They were wrong. I walked 2 blocks and then hailed a cab. "Where to?" the driver asked. "The Pentagon," I said. As the car merged into traffic, my phone buzzed. It was an automated email from the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency. The subject line was stark. "Final adjudication interview scheduled. 0900 hours tomorrow." It was the final step. The interviewer would decide if I kept my clearance or lost everything. Usually, these interviews were about clarifying debts or explaining travel. But tomorrow, I was walking in with a flash drive that would turn my family's business into a crime scene. I was not just going to defend my clearance, I was going to hand them the smoking gun that would bury the people who gave me life. I looked out the window at the Washington Monument piercing the sky. It stood tall, white, and unyielding. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The bridge was not just burned, I had blown it up, and for the first time in 33 years, on the other side of the flames, I could see a future that was entirely my own. The Pentagon is not just a building, it is a fortress of geometry, a city within a city where the air is recycled and the secrets are structural. I arrived at the visitor center at 8:45 in the morning. I had walked through these doors 1,000 times before as an employee, flashing a badge and walking the corridors with a coffee in hand. But today was different. Today, I was not an employee. I was a subject. I had to surrender my personal phone, my smartwatch, and even my digital car keys. The security officers were professional, but they were thorough. They scanned my bag. They waved the wand over my shoes. I felt the weight of the silver flash drive in my blazer pocket. It felt radioactive. I had debated leaving it in a locker, handing it over later, but I knew I needed it on me. I needed the physical reminder of why I was here. I was escorted by a silent military policeman to a room in a sub-basement I had never visited. The walls were soundproofed beige foam. The table was bolted to the floor. There was no mirror, just a camera mounted in the corner, its red eye unblinking. The man waiting for me was not an administrative bureaucrat like Investigator Vance. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with hair the color of steel wool and a face that looked like it had been eroded by sandstorms. He wore a suit, but he wore it like a uniform. His posture was rigid, his hands resting on the table with precise discipline. "Sit down, Ms. Willis," he said. His voice was gravel. I sat. "I am Colonel Holloway," he said. "I am the senior adjudicator for this sector. I have reviewed the preliminary findings from the investigation initiated by the tip regarding your finances." I nodded. "I understand, Colonel." "Do you?" he asked. He opened a thick paper file. It was the master copy of my record. The red cover indicated top-secret sensitive compartmented information. "You are here because your family accused you of being compromised," Holloway said. "They provided documents suggesting you are in debt to foreign entities. We have since proven those documents were forged. However, the question of vulnerability remains. A person whose family is willing to commit federal crimes to control them is a person who has a leverage point we cannot ignore." I kept my hands folded. "I know I am a risk, sir." Holloway flipped through the pages. He was reading my operational history, not the cover story my parents saw, but the real one. The years of analyzing signal intercepts, the nights spent tracking funding for terror cells, the quiet, invisible work that kept planes in the sky and bombs from detonating. He stopped at page 42. His finger, thick and scarred, rested on a line of text. He stared at it for a long time. The silence in the room stretched out, thin and tight as a wire. "Operation Iron Shepherd," he read aloud. "October, 6 years ago." I did not speak. I was trained not to speak about Iron Shepherd. It was still classified. Holloway looked up at me. His eyes were a piercing pale blue. "I was on the ground for that one," he said softly. My breath caught in my throat. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the faint white line of an old shrapnel wound near his temple. We were pinned down in a valley in the Kunar province, Holloway said. He was not looking at me anymore. He was looking through the wall, back to a place of dust and blood. We had taken heavy fire. Communications were jammed. We had 3 wounded men and no way to call for extraction. We thought we were dead. We were writing letters to our wives in our heads. He tapped the file. Then, out of nowhere, the jammer went down. Just for 3 minutes. Long enough for us to get the signal out. Long enough for the birds to come get us. He looked back at me. The report says the jammer was disabled remotely by a cyber warfare specialist operating out of Fort Meade. The specialist routed a surge through the insurgents' own power grid and fried their equipment. He looked at the code next to the operation name. That was you, wasn't it? I looked at the colonel. I remembered that night. I remembered the cold coffee on my desk, the 3 monitors glowing in the dark, the desperate race against encryption protocols, as I tried to find a back door into a primitive localized grid on the other side of the world. I remembered the relief when the signal bar turned green. I never knew the names of the men in the valley. I only knew them as blips on a screen. I cannot confirm or deny specific operational details. Colonel, I said. My voice was steady, but my heart was hammering. Holloway watched me. He saw the recognition in my eyes. He saw the discipline holding it back. He closed the file. He did not slam it this time. He closed it with reverence. You saved my life, Ms. Willis, he said, and the lives of 12 other men. I sat in the silence, feeling the shift in the room. The air was no longer hostile. The dynamic of interrogator and suspect had evaporated. We were 2 soldiers acknowledging a shared battlefield. He took a deep breath and leaned back. Your parents, he said. His tone was different now. It was no longer the voice of a judge. It was the voice of a commanding officer warning a subordinate about a sniper in the trees. They do not know who you are, do they? No, sir, I said. They think I am a clerk. And because they think you are a clerk, they think you are weak, Holloway said. He shook his head. They have no idea that the woman they are trying to bully is the reason half the eastern seaboard is safe tonight. He intertwined his fingers. Ms. Willis, I am going to be very direct with you. The investigation into your clearance is effectively over, with the evidence of fraud against your parents and your record of service. I am clearing you for full return to duty. Thank you, sir, I said. But, he continued, raising a hand, we have a new problem, a much bigger problem. I waited. Your family is not just a nuisance, Holloway said. They are a threat vector. They have demonstrated a willingness to fabricate evidence, suborn perjury, and manipulate federal agencies. They have shown they have no respect for boundaries or law. And now, they are cornered. He leaned forward. A cornered animal bites. Journey. They have lost their control over you. They have lost their reputation. They are about to lose their business contracts. They are going to lash out. And because they are your blood, they know exactly where to hit you. They know your buttons. They know your history. I reached into my pocket. My hand closed around the flash drive. They do not just know my history, Colonel, I said. They are trying to make me part of their future criminal defense. Holloway's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? I pulled the silver drive out and placed it on the metal table. It made a small click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. My sister gave this to me yesterday. I said, my father asked her to. He thinks that because I am in the system now, I can make things disappear. Holloway did not touch the drive. What is on it? Manifests, I said, for a container currently sitting in Baltimore. It contains dual-use avionics bound for a sanctioned region. They are smuggling restricted technology to prop up their profit margins. My father wanted me to use my clearance to get it past customs. Holloway stared at the drive. Then he looked at me. You know what this is, he said. This is not just family drama. This is a violation of the Arms Export Control Act. If you enter this into evidence, you are not just getting your parents fined, you are sending them to federal prison. You are burning the family tree to the ground. I thought about Lena crying in the coffee shop. I thought about my father's arrogant belief that I was his property. I thought about the men in the valley that Holloway had spoken about. The men who relied on people like me to follow the rules so they could come home alive. I know what it is, I said. Holloway picked up the drive. He held it up to the light. It takes a hell of a lot of courage to save strangers in a valley in Afghanistan, he said quietly. But it takes a different kind of courage to turn in the people who raised you. He looked at me with a profound, sad respect. Are you sure, Ms. Willis? Once I plug this in, there is no going back. The Department of Justice will be involved within the hour. The FBI will execute warrants before lunch. Your family will be destroyed. They destroyed themselves. Colonel, I said, I am just signing the casualty report. Holloway nodded. He opened a secure port on his terminal and inserted the drive. A moment later, the screen populated with data. Holloway scanned the manifests, his face hardening into a mask of professional fury. Dual-use gyroscopes, he muttered. Restricted guidance chips. Jesus, they were selling this to a regime that funds the very insurgents we fight. He looked up at me. The realization hit him fully. My parents were not just greedy. They were profiting from the enemies I had spent my career fighting. My father bought his scotch and his suits with money made by arming the people who tried to kill men like Holloway. I am sorry. Journey, he said. He used my first name. Do not be, I replied. I am done protecting them. Holloway picked up his phone. He dialed a 4-digit internal number. This is Colonel Holloway. Adjudication, he said into the receiver. Get me the director of the FBI. Yes. Personally, I have a code red violation of the Export Control Act involving a major defense contractor, and I have a cooperating witness on site. He hung up. You should go, Ms. Willis, he said. You do not need to be here for the arrest. We will handle the extraction of the data. You have done your duty. I stood up. My legs felt light. The crushing weight I had carried since that dinner party, the guilt, the obligation, the fear, was gone. Colonel? I asked at the door. He looked up. Thank you for telling me about Iron Shepherd. I said, I never knew if it worked. He smiled, a rare, genuine expression that cracked his weathered face. It worked, kid. You did good. Now go get some lunch. You look like you haven't eaten in a week. I walked out of the room. I walked back through the corridors, past the uniformed soldiers and the busy analysts. I walked out into the bright sunlight of the parking lot. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of exhaust and Potomac River water. But to me, it smelled like freedom. I had walked into the Pentagon as a suspect. I was walking out as a free woman, and somewhere in the city, the clock was ticking down the final minutes of the Willis Empire. The counterattack did not begin with a bang. It began with a courier standing in the hallway of my apartment building at 6 a.m. He was not government. He was private sector, wearing a suit that cost more than my car and holding a thick envelope embossed with the logo of Hightower and Associates. My mother had hired Sterling Hightower in Washington. That name meant one thing: scorched earth. Hightower was the kind of lawyer you hired when you did not care about the truth, only about destruction. He was a specialist in reputation management and aggressive litigation. I signed for the packet. My hand did not shake. The fear I used to feel for my parents had evaporated in that interrogation room at the Pentagon. It had been replaced by a cold, clinical curiosity. I wondered how far they would go. I opened the envelope over my kitchen counter. It was a petition for an emergency competency hearing. I read the legal jargon, and I almost laughed. My mother was not suing me for defamation. She was not suing me for property. She was petitioning a family court to grant her temporary conservatorship over my affairs. The filing claimed that I was suffering from acute paranoid delusions and persecutory psychosis. It cited my withdrawal from family contact, my obsessive secrecy regarding employment, and this was the masterpiece, my recent erratic behavior involving fabricated government conspiracies. They were trying to Britney Spears me. It was a desperate, tactical nuke. If a judge ruled I was mentally incompetent, My testimony regarding the illegal shipments would be inadmissible. The flash drive I gave Colonel Holloway would be painted as the forgery of a sick mind. They were trying to invalidate me as a witness by invalidating me as a human being. I picked up my secure phone and called Vance. They filed for conservatorship, I said. I know, Vance replied. His voice was crisp. We were alerted the moment the filing hit the docket. Hightower is good. He is trying to bypass the federal investigation by moving this into family court where security clearances do not matter. Can they do this? I asked. They can try, Vance said, but they are bringing a knife to a drone fight. Do not respond. Do not engage. Let the Department of Justice handle Hightower. You have a new package coming your way. The package Vance mentioned was not legal paperwork. It was a status update on the Willis Empire. By noon, the business world had begun to react to the quiet alarms triggered by the Pentagon. The Department of Commerce had placed Willis Integrated Logistics on the entity list. It was a death sentence. It meant that no American company could export goods to them or receive goods from them without a special license, which would never be granted. My father's phone must have been melting. I could imagine the scene in his office, the phones ringing off the hook, the emails bouncing back, the sudden, terrifying silence of the telex machines that used to print shipping orders 24 hours a day. But Richard Willis was not a man who accepted defeat. When legal force failed, he turned to his oldest weapon, guilt. At 2 o'clock, a letter was slipped under my door. It had bypassed the mail system. My father had likely paid a private messenger cash to deliver it personally. The envelope was handwritten, "My dearest Journey." I opened it. The handwriting was shaky, a calculated affectation of frailty. Journey, it read, I am writing this from the study. Your mother is in the other room crying. She does not understand why you are doing this. I am not writing to argue about the business. I do not care about the money anymore. I am writing because my doctor was here this morning. My heart, Journey, the stress is too much. He says I am at risk of a massive cardiac event if this continues. Do you want that on your conscience? Do you want to stand at my grave knowing you put me there over a misunderstanding about some shipping containers? Please, call off the dogs. Come home. We can fix this. I love you. Dad. I stared at the paper. A year ago, this letter would have broken me. I would have rushed to his side. I would have apologized for existing. I would have done anything to lower his blood pressure. But today, I saw the mechanics of it. I saw the manipulation. He did not mention the illegal avionics. He did not mention the conservatorship filing his wife had just signed. He only mentioned his heart, the one organ he had never actually used in his relationship with me. He was holding his own life hostage to force my compliance. I took a lighter from my drawer. I held the flame to the corner of the letter and watched it curl into black ash in the sink. I did not feel sad. I felt a profound sense of release. The man who wrote that letter was not a father. He was a negotiator trying to close a bad deal. Then came the third blow. But this one did not come from my parents. It came from inside their house. My secure email pinged. It was a message from an anonymous account, but the subject line was a nickname only one person used, Jaybird. It was Lena. I opened the attachment. It was an audio file. I am sorry. The text of the email read, I cannot let them say you are crazy. I cannot let them win. Listen to this. I put on my headphones and clicked play. The recording was grainy. It sounded like it had been recorded on a phone inside a pocket. I heard the clinking of china. My parents were eating lunch. She is unstable. Richard, my mother's voice said. It was sharp and clear. Hightower says if we can get the judge to sign the order by Friday, we can pull her out of that apartment and put her in the clinic in Zurich, the one with no phone access. It is risky, my father's voice replied. If the feds find out we are trying to ship a witness out of the country— She is not a witness, my mother snapped. She is our daughter, and she is ruining everything. What about the Baltimore shipment? Did you talk to the port authority? I paid the bribe, my father said, $50,000 to the union steward to lose the paperwork. But if Journey talks, if she actually gave them the manifests, the bribe won't matter. We need to discredit her. We need to make sure that flash drive looks like something she forged because she hates us. Then tell Hightower to push harder, my mother said. Tell him to say she is a danger to herself. Say she threatened suicide. Whatever it takes. We cannot go to jail. Richard, not for a few gyroscopes. The recording ended. I sat in silence. The air in my apartment felt electrified. This was not just evidence of the smuggling. This was evidence of a conspiracy to kidnap me. They were planning to force me into a mental institution in Switzerland to silence me. They were discussing it over lunch like they were discussing a renovation project. My hands were trembling, not from fear but from rage. Pure, white-hot rage. I forwarded the file to Vance. Then I forwarded it to Colonel Holloway. I typed a single message attached to the file. This is not just smuggling. This is witness tampering and conspiracy to kidnap. I want them stopped. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Vance. We got the file, he said. His voice was grim. Journey. This changes the timeline. We were building a financial case, but this is an immediate threat to life and liberty. What are you going to do? I asked. We are taking the gloves off, Vance said. The Department of Justice is filing an emergency motion to dismiss their conservatorship petition based on evidence of criminal intent. And we are filing countercharges: stalking, harassment, conspiracy. And the business? I asked. The business is over, Vance said. With this recording, we have proof that Richard Willis authorized bribery of a port official. That is a violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. We are freezing everything: their personal accounts, the corporate accounts, the offshore trusts. By tomorrow morning, your parents won't be able to buy a gallon of milk. I walked to the window. I looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, my parents were probably sitting in their living room, sipping wine, thinking Hightower was going to save them. They thought they were untouchable. They thought I was the scared little girl who desperately wanted their approval. They did not realize that I had just handed the government the hammer to smash their world into dust. I am done hiding. Vance, I said into the phone, I want to file a restraining order, a permanent one. I want it on the public record that the reason I'm estranged from my family is not because I'm crazy. It is because they are criminals. Consider it done, Vance said. Journey, are you okay? I touched the glass of the window. It was cool against my fingertips. I have never been better, I said, and I meant it. The family was not just fracturing, it was atomizing. Lena had defected. I had turned state's witness. My parents were turning on each other, fueled by panic and the terrifying realization that their money could not bribe their way out of a federal indictment. My mother's plan to paint me as insane had backfired. Instead, she had provided the final piece of evidence to prove that she was the one who had lost touch with reality. She thought she could lock me away in a Swiss clinic. Instead, she had just locked herself into a prison cell. The final conclusion was being drafted in an office at the Department of Justice. It would not be a letter of reconciliation. It would be an indictment. And for the first time in my life, I was not afraid of what my parents would say when they read it. I was only looking forward to the silence that would follow. The collapse of the Willis dynasty did not happen with a bang, but with the beep of a cardiac monitor. 3 days after I handed the flash drive to Colonel Holloway, my father was found unconscious on the floor of his study. He had not been faking this time. The stress of the frozen assets, the looming indictments, and the realization that his name was becoming a synonym for corporate treason had finally exerted a pressure that his heart could not withstand. I received the call from Lena at 2 a.m. She was crying. But it was not the hysterical, terrified crying of the girl in the coffee shop. It was the exhausted, hollow weeping of a woman who had been running a marathon in the dark. He is in the ICU at Walter Reed, Lena said. Massive myocardial infarction. They did a bypass. He is alive, but he is weak. I sat up in bed, looking at the city lights of Arlington through my window. A week ago, this news would have sent me rushing to my car, fueled by a daughter's instinctive panic, but tonight, I felt a strange, cool detachment. I felt concern. Yes, but it was the concern one feels for a distant relative, or a former neighbor. The cord that connected my pulse to his had been severed in that interrogation room. "I will come," I said, "but I'm not coming into the room." When I arrived at the hospital, the scene in the waiting area was a grotesque parody of the family dynamic I had escaped. My mother, Eleonora, was there. She was not sitting by her husband's bedside holding his hand. She was standing in the corridor, wearing a pristine cream-colored suit that looked like it had been tailored for a funeral, speaking in hushed, furious tones to a woman I recognized as the family's crisis PR manager. "We need to spin this as a stress-induced event caused by government overreach," my mother was saying. Checking her makeup in a compact mirror, "We can get an exclusive with the Post. Titan of industry, felled by witch hunt. It will generate sympathy. It might even delay the hearings." I stood by the elevator bank, watching her. Her husband was lying in a room filled with machines keeping him alive, and she was drafting a press release. She was terrified of losing her status, not her partner. She saw his heart attack not as a tragedy, but as a tactical opportunity to regain control of the narrative. She looked up and saw me. For a second, her mask slipped. I saw fear. I saw hatred. And then, the mask snapped back into place. "Journey," she said, walking toward me with her arms open. "Thank God. We can use this. If we go in there together, take a picture holding his hand." I took a step back. "Do not touch me, Mother." She froze. "Journey, he is dying. You have to put this aside." "I am not here for the photo op," I said quietly, "and I am not here for you." I walked past her. She tried to grab my arm, but a security guard, one I had requested through Vance, stepped in between us. My mother gasped, offended that her touch was being treated as a threat. But it was a threat. She was a drowning woman trying to pull me under to use as a raft. I found Lena sitting on a plastic chair near the nurse's station. She looked terrible. She was wearing sweatpants and a university hoodie, her hair in a messy bun. She looked real. "Is he awake?" I asked. Lena nodded. "He can't speak much. The tube is out, but he is groggy. He keeps asking for you." I sat down next to her. "I am not going in there." "Lena." "I know," she said. She did not argue. She did not try to guilt me. She just leaned her head on my shoulder. "I told the FBI everything," Lena whispered, "yesterday, before he collapsed. I gave them the emails. I gave them the instructions he sent me about the bribes. I told them I signed the manifest because I was afraid of him." I put my arm around her. "You did the right thing." "Did I?" Lena asked, her voice trembling. "I put my own father in the hospital." "His choices put him in the hospital," I said firmly. "You just turned on the light so we could all see the mess. You stopped him from dragging you down with him. That is not betrayal. Lena, that is survival." We sat there for an hour, two sisters in the quiet hum of the hospital. We talked about things we hadn't discussed in years. We talked about the time we built a fort in the backyard before Mother told us it ruined the grass. We talked about the books we used to read. We did not talk about the company. We did not talk about the investigation. We just existed in the space between the wreckage. Then, a nurse came out of my father's room. She was holding a folded piece of paper. "Ms. Willis?" she asked. Looking at me, "Your father insisted. He wrote it himself. It took him 20 minutes. He said it was for Journey." I took the paper. It was a page from a medical chart, written on the back with a shaky hand. The letters were jagged, the ink trailing off in places where his strength had failed him. "Journey. I thought I was building an empire for you. I told myself that everything I did, the bribes, the pressure, the lies, was to secure a legacy that you would one day thank me for. I told myself I was a good father because I wanted to give you the world. I never stopped to ask if you wanted it. I see now. You did not leave because you were ungrateful. You left because you were decent. And I hated you for it because your decency made me look at my own reflection, and I did not like what I saw. I am not asking for forgiveness. I cannot afford it. I am just telling you that you won. You were always the strong one. I was just the loud one. Goodbye. Richard." I read the letter twice, I folded it carefully and put it in my pocket. It was not a redemption. It did not erase the years of belittling comments. It did not undo the felony fraud he had committed to destroy my career. It did not fix the fact that he had tried to sell weapons to enemies of the state. But it was the truth, for the first time in 33 years. Richard Willis had told me the truth. He admitted that his control was born of insecurity, that his anger was born of shame. He admitted that I was not the broken one. He was— "Do you want to go in?" Lena asked gently. I looked at the closed door of room 412. I imagined him lying there, small and gray in the white sheets. I felt a pang of sadness, sharp and deep, but I also felt the wall I had built around myself, the wall that kept me safe, the wall that defined who I was. "No," I said. "Why not?" "Because if I go in there, I give him the closure he wants." I said, "I let him think that a deathbed confession fixes a lifetime of manipulation. I let him think we are okay. We are not okay. Lena, I can pity him. I can wish him recovery. But I cannot be his daughter again. That role does not exist anymore." I stood up. "Tell him I got the note," I said. "Tell him I agree." I walked back to the waiting area. My mother was on the phone again, her voice rising in artificial hysteria as she berated some unfortunate reporter. She did not even see me leave. She was too busy fighting for the ghost of a reputation that was already dead. I walked out of the hospital into the cool pre-dawn air. The city was waking up. The traffic was starting to hum on the Beltway. I felt lighter. The letter in my pocket was not a burden. It was a release. It was the final confirmation that I had been right to leave, right to fight, right to burn the bridge. My phone buzzed. It was Vance. "The Department of Justice is ready." The message read, "Final settlement conference scheduled for Friday at 1000 hours. Your attendance is required to close the file." I typed back, "I will be there." I hailed a cab. As I rode back to my apartment, I thought about the word family for so long. I thought it meant obligation. I thought it meant enduring toxicity because you shared a last name. But looking at the empty seat next to me and thinking about Lena sleeping in that plastic chair, I realized that family was not about blood. It was about alignment. It was about the people who stood beside you when the lights went out, not the ones who tried to leave you in the dark. My father had his legacy, my mother had her delusions, and I had the truth. I was ready for the end. I was ready to walk into that conference room, look them in the eye, and sign the paper that would turn Journey Willis from a daughter into a stranger. And for the first time, the thought did not make me lonely. It made me free. The conference room at the Department of Justice was not designed for family reunions. It was designed for capitulation. The table was long. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that kept everyone awake and uncomfortable, and the water in the pitchers was lukewarm. On one side sat the full weight of the United States government, Investigator Vance, Colonel Holloway, and two senior prosecutors who looked like they carved statutes out of granite for a living. On the other side sat the remnants of the Willis dynasty. My mother, Eleonora, was perfectly coiffed, but her hands were gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. My father, Richard, sat in a wheelchair, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. His face was gray, but his eyes were clear. Beside them was Sterling Hightower, their expensive lawyer, who looked like a man realizing his billable hours were about to be cut short. I sat at the head of the table. I was not on either side. I was the pivot point. Vance slid the final agreement across the mahogany surface. "This is the national security determination," Vance said. His voice was devoid of theater. "It finds that the actions of Richard and Eleonora Willis constituted a malicious insider threat event. It confirms that you knowingly fabricated evidence to trigger a federal investigation against a cleared asset." My mother opened her mouth to speak, but Hightower placed a hand on her arm to silence her. "As a result," Vance continued, "the Department of Defense is implementing a mandatory mitigation plan for Willis Integrated Logistics. You will pay a fine of $5 million. You will accept a permanent federal monitor who will have veto power over all your contracts, and you, Richard and Eleanora Willis, are hereby permanently debarred from holding any executive position in any company that does business with the United States government." The silence in the room was absolute. "Debarred?" my mother whispered. It was a word she had probably never heard applied to herself. That means you are retired." "Ma'am," Vance said, "you are out. You have no control. You have no board seat. You are just shareholders with no voting rights. And regarding Ms. Journey Willis," one of the prosecutors added, "we are issuing a permanent prohibited association order. This means you are legally forbidden from contacting her, approaching her, or utilizing third parties to track her. If you violate this order, you will be arrested immediately. No hearings, no bail. Straight to federal custody." My mother looked at me. Her eyes were wet, but it was the tears of a deposed queen, not a grieving mother. "Journey," she said, her voice shaking, "is this what you wanted? To humiliate us? To take the company your father built and hand it over to strangers? We did everything for you. We just wanted you to be safe. We just wanted you to come home." I looked at her. For 33 years. Her voice had been the soundtrack of my insecurities. She had told me I was too quiet, too stubborn, too plain, too secretive. She had tried to mold me into a socialite, and when that failed, she had tried to break me into a dependent. I leaned forward. "You did not want me safe. Mother," I said, "you wanted me small. You were terrified that I might become something you could not take credit for. You thought that if you stripped away my clearance, took away my job, and ruined my reputation, I would have no choice but to crawl back to the guest room and work in your dispatch office." I stood up. "But you made a mistake," I said. "You assumed that my job defined me. You thought that without the badge, I was nothing." I looked at Colonel Holloway. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. "And you made a bigger mistake," I continued. "You spent $50,000 on a private investigator. You bribed port officials. You committed felonies to destroy my position at the NSA's encryption desk." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But I have not worked at the encryption desk in 8 months." My mother blinked. "What?" My father lifted his head, his eyes narrowing. "I transferred units last January," I said. "The job you were trying to get me fired from? I left it voluntarily. The clearance you were trying to revoke? It was for a position I no longer hold. I moved to Cyber Command to lead a forward-deployed threat analysis team." I saw the realization hit them. It was a physical blow. "You mean—" my mother stammered. "I mean you destroyed your reputation, lost your company, and committed treason to attack a ghost." I said, "You were firing at an empty chair." The futility of it crushed the room. All their scheming, all their manipulation, all the money they had spent. It was all for nothing. They hadn't just been malicious. They had been irrelevant. They were fighting a war I had already won and walked away from. My mother's face crumpled. She looked at Hightower, then at my father, desperate for someone to tell her this was a lie, that she still had power, that she was still the protagonist of the story. "Richard," she cried out, grabbing his arm, "say something. Tell her she is lying. Tell them we are the victims here. We are the Willis family." My father slowly pulled his arm away from her grip. He looked at the paper in front of him, the order that stripped him of his life's work. Then he looked at me. He looked at the daughter he had tried to break, and he saw the woman who had outmaneuvered him at every turn. He took the pen from the table. "Richard?" my mother shrieked. "What are you doing? Do not sign that. We fight this. We take it to the Supreme Court." "Be quiet, Eleanora," my father said. It was not a shout. It was a command, spoken with a gravity I had never heard from him before. He did not look at her. He kept his eyes on me. "It is over," he said to her, his voice raspy but firm. "We lost. We deserved to lose." He looked at me with a strange expression. It wasn't love, exactly. It was too late for that. It was the grim acknowledgement of a defeated general saluting the adversary who had bested him. "You are better at this than I ever was. Journey," he said. "You are tougher than me." He signed the document. My mother stared at him in horror. For the first time in their marriage, he had refused to play her game. He had refused to feed her delusion. He had chosen the brutal truth over the comfortable lie. He pushed the paper toward the prosecutor. "I am done," my father said. "Take me home." The meeting ended not with a bang, but with the shuffling of papers. The prosecutors packed up their briefcases. Vance gave me a firm handshake. Colonel Holloway simply tapped the edge of the table, a soldier's gesture of respect. I walked out of the conference room and into the hallway. Lena was waiting there. She had not been in the room. She had been sitting on a bench, twisting a ring on her finger. When she saw me, she stood up. "Is it done?" she asked. "It is done," I said. She looked at the door where our parents were still sitting, likely arguing in hushed tones. "I am resigning," Lena said. "The prosecutor told me that if I cooperate with the monitor, I won't face charges for the manifests, but I cannot stay there. I cannot work for them anymore." "Good," I said. "You deserve a life that belongs to you." Lena looked at me. There were tears in her eyes. "Are you going to be okay?" she asked. "You are all alone now. Journey, no family, no safety net." I smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached all the way to my eyes. "I am not alone, Lena." I thought about the men in the valley in Afghanistan, the ones Colonel Holloway had told me about, the ones who were alive because I did my job. I thought about the team waiting for me at Cyber Command, the brilliant, quiet professionals who judged me by my code, not my bank account. I thought about the silence of my apartment, which was no longer empty, but full of peace. My parents had spent their lives trying to convince me that I was nothing without them. They had tried to buy my loyalty and, when that failed, they tried to steal my future. But in the end, they had only succeeded in setting me free. I walked over to my sister and hugged her. It was the only bridge I had left standing, and it was the only one worth keeping. "Call me next week," I said. "We will get coffee. Real coffee, not a strategy meeting." I turned and walked toward the exit of the Department of Justice. The heavy glass doors opened, and I stepped out onto Pennsylvania Avenue. The sun was shining, bright and blinding. I adjusted my sunglasses and walked down the steps. I did not look back at the building. I did not look back at the wreckage of the Willis Empire. I did not need their money. I did not need their approval. And I certainly did not need their permission to exist. I had my name, I had my honor, and somewhere out there were 12 men who had gone home to their families because of me. They would never know my name, and I would never know theirs. But that was enough. That was everything. The traffic light turned green. I stepped off the curb and walked into the crowd. Just another face in the city, invisible, essential, and finally, completely free. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment down below where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories, like the video, and hit that hype button so this story can reach even more people.